Welcome to our August webinar with John Dean and Josefa Domingos. John Dean is a speech and language pathologist that specializes in Parkinson's, and Josefa Domingos, who is his wife, is a physiotherapist, physical therapist that specializes in Parkinson's. This wonderful duo has conducted numerous webinars for us. They're some of the most knowledgeable Parkinson's experts. Thank you both. And today they're going to talk all about gait, standing, freezing, some really practical tools and tips. Thank you both, and please take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for coming in, especially in August. So hopefully you are all nice and cool at home and we can discuss these topics. So I would jump right into it and say that we have combined three keywords. And I'd say three very complex situations of daily living, which is being able to stand up, being able to walk, and I would say being able to not have hesitation moments that we call freeze. So to be able to be very practical in this webinar, what I did is like, what do we need to be able to give people practical tips for each one of these areas, being that each one of them is highly complex and probably would be a talk on its own. And one of the things that occurred to me, okay, let's think about for each one of them, we have specific components that will be playing an important role. So we have posture, we have balance, we have cognition, and we have a whole group that are called others that I'll get into. All these components will somehow influence and our ability to be able to keep an upright posture and to be able to stand, and also for us to be able to maintain our balance and to be able to walk, right? So what this means is here we have to think about what type of tips would I need to improve posture or balance or cognition and the other group that I'll go into, so that it will help you be able to stand better or to walk better, right? So this is the outline that we're going to go through. It's just thinking of practical things, and because it could be so complex, I've decided to just reflect on one of the strongest one for each one of them. So one tip that would be very important for posture, one for balance, one for cognition, and for the others that I'll go right now into, we can imagine that if there are atypical situations and complications that may occur in Parkinson, that will make everything else more hard. And so I will touch upon slightly on the situations so that you understand if some of the tips that I might be giving might not be applied because of this, because we are talking about a specific situation that maybe the response should be in a different direction. And we have things like medication obviously playing the most important role in any of the Parkinson's symptoms, right? And then sleep, and then pain and mood. So we'll cover a little bit of each, but keeping in mind that what we want is to share with you some strategies that would be useful at the end of the day for each one of these, so that it can influence the walking and the standing. Okay. So let us start with our folder of posture. So I was thinking as like, what if I had 5 seconds with a person with Parkinson and I had to tell them one thing that is important about posture, what would it be? So this is the exercise that I did to build this presentation. And what occurs to me in posture is making people aware that the feet are always in a tendency to be together. So if you all look down now, you probably might identify this. And so I really want to just bring how important this issue is in most situations. So these are 5 people with Parkinson that are at a Parkinson event. And I was going around taking pictures so that we could identify this situation. And it's remarkable to see, even in different slightly positions, people are always with their feet slightly together.
The heels like that, in kind of like Cupid's bow kind of position.
Some of the men usually tend to tell me, but I have my feet apart, and what they are feeling is like the toes are apart, but the heels are actually together. So it's really increasing that awareness that this will influence the way you feel when you're standing in the standing position. And John is just trying to manage here.
I'm trying to get rid of this bar. Here, maybe I can move it around, guys.
Zoom just updated, so we apologize that it will bring on issues.
Yeah, I will get around it. So I'm making sure Control Alt Shift H. Yes, that's what it's pressing. Okay.
Okay, so hopefully we might have a situation that we can control as well with this freezing. So our keynote that we were trying to highlight here is that this tendency for us to have our feet together, combined with an underlying issue in Parkinson, where you can see this is a research that's been done that allows us to identify, because in the standing position, we are never actually fully stopped, right? So what we have is our center of gravity is always moving. And so what you can see in this image is just a comparison of someone with Parkinson and someone without Parkinson, and how there is a continuous shift of our weight as we in the standing position, with a bigger variability in Parkinson. So if this is happening, and now you also add in the feet together, you can see how maybe standing in the standing position makes you feel less, I would say, balanced. The word that people usually describe, I don't feel totally secure when I'm in the standing position. This problem, if we think, okay, so what would be the solution? When we are walking, it's more challenging for us to think about this, because obviously there's lots of factors that will interfere with the walking. But I wanted to highlight that in these positions, which is things that we have more control over. So either if we fall asleep on the couch, if we are working on a table, or if we engaged in another activity, these are situations where a little bit of alertness and help, obviously, of the people that are around you, like the care partners or family, that will always call your attention to this, so that you can reinforce using this cue and this strategy in the sitting position, which is much easier than to be able to apply it in the walking position. Reinforcing again that, especially if you are engaging in other activities, in this case it's two people with Parkinson that are talking, and you can see in their feet how uncomfortable you might interpret this image. Especially the gentleman on the left is actually with his toes lifting up, so you can see that either the chair is too small, which could be the option, but imagine that you are engaging in a 1 hour talk, and the amount of strain that this will cause to all your legs and the muscles at the end of that talk. So when you get up, you will have hesitations, you will have more fatigue, right? So the relevance of this is the impact it has when we want to move. And most importantly, the impact it has when we walk. So walking becomes something like this. And all the training that people do is to stop this. So this, again, it's 4 people with Parkinson, all very different, the amplitude of the steps and the sizes, but you can see a common thread, which is the heels are usually coming together. So for you to retain this image, it would be like walking on a stick like this. And you can imagine the impact that this has on balance and on walking. So imagine you are constantly, if you feel unsteady, was the word that I was looking for before. So the person feels unsteady in the standing position, is because ultimately the way we are using the body is bringing that sense of not safeness, and so the brain is wobbling more, right? So how can we also think about, okay, so what can I do about it in daily activities? I know that people also do a lot of exercise, and walking is usually one of them. So find things in the environment that can help guide you and cue you. So this is just a gentleman that instead of walking in the walking pavement, I just told him, you know, just imagine this, you have 1 foot on the green and one foot on the white. And this was a way for him to cue himself into keeping that space in between the legs while he's doing his common gait walking training. And this one happens to be even better, which was the placement of the stones in the environment that actually guide you onto putting the left foot in or the right foot out. So it's just being creative in the environment, to the point I would say that it doesn't matter where you go. This is always something, the idea behind this strategy is to really help you think about how can I apply this in whatever situation I do? I would probably advise against this type of training because I just easier for us to walk it. But it is possible to really reinforce it. You might want to find things that are easier on the physiotherapist. But we are in holidays, and so I know people are probably doing activities and such, so you can always take these ideas on board. Very exhausting. Again, the physiotherapist has to be in shape. So for this, for our first point, and as I said, I can probably put a lot of things in this folder of posture, a lot of conversation and tips, but this one would be the one that I would highlight as the strongest thing that I can tell you, is to be aware in any situation that you are to keep your feet comfortably apart. And the word comfortably pops in now because sometimes people might have the sense that, oh, if I feel like my legs are too open. And I want to remind people that we are receiving information that's not the best from the body because there's changes in the information that's getting to the brain. And so that means you might feel awkward, but you actually, as you can see, the tendency is to be too close. So by feeling awkward, you are probably in the right place. I usually tend to tell the people that I'm working with, it's like, if it feels awkward, it's probably right.
That's not uncommon to what you deal with voice, where often people might be telling you that they think you're too quiet and you feel like you're talking with the same volume you've always been using. So it's an analog to that, I think.
Yeah, it's the way the information is being interpreted in the brain is probably not based on the best information. And so we have to just be able to highlight these issues and be on top of it.
Yeah, recalibrate.
So I hope this makes sense to you. This is one of the first key messages that we wanted to pass. And now if we think about it, okay, so now we have the feet are apart, that's good. What's a new, I wouldn't say new problem, what is an additional problem that we have? One of the things that if I had to choose for balance is to be able to make people aware that there is an asymmetry. Typically in Parkinson, there's one side more affected than the other. And what you'll see in this video, it's basically the beach is a good place for us to see how one foot will be more marked on the sand than the other, right? So which just shows that we are constantly throughout the day working more one side than the other. We usually go into the less affected side. It's a side where we feel more comfortable. Again, atypical things might happen, but this would be the most common thing, is we have an overuse of the less affected side. I would say an overuse of the most affected side. But balance is really complex. So I really want to highlight that. Obviously, a lot of things goes into balance, and I'm trying to choose one practical one that would be really useful to you. This complexity of balance, I kept it on purpose. These are words that are used in the research world to identify different things that might be contributing negatively to balance, to the person feeling unbalanced. And we know that this can also be a core issue in Parkinson. Being one that I would highlight, the one that we were talking about impaired kinesthesia, which means the information that you are receiving from your body might be changed. And so that means the brain is going to take decisions based on that information, and it might not be the most precise. So people might be saying, no, but I am upright. And then you take the person to the mirror and you say, what do you think? Oh yeah, you're right. I'm not upright. So you need additional information to be able to make the best decisions. Then we have obviously the most typical thing in Parkinson, which is things become less automatic. It's like our automatic pilot is not working as well. And so things that you didn't have to think about, like how you place your feet and how to be able to talk to somebody without feeling unsteady. So those things lose their automaticity and will affect your balance. The slowness of movements, being slow, is the key word for Parkinson. So even if you think about it, if I'm walking slow, I require more balance. So speed and slow movement have to come together, and that's why most of the trainings also reinforce this.
Again, I feel like this is kind of like speech in some ways, because if you're having a hard time understanding, and then when it speaks and they slow down, it changes the way the words are formed, and it's not actually beneficial. You need to have a certain amount of tempo. Is that what you're kind of getting to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's like the combination, and obviously the bradykinesia, as you know, is a clinical. It's one way to diagnose Parkinson, right? It has to be there, the slowness of movement. And then you have things like the rigidity that will affect the way that information is getting to the brain. So all these are really intertwined, I think, might be the right word, and will affect how you will perceive these activities, being or standing or talking. Also wanted to highlight here is there's a lot of research going into this area. So, I mean, there's congresses only on freezing of gait. There's 4 or 5 days of only on walking as well. So you can see how much people are dedicating time to study this, and highlighting here that we know what should be a normal pattern of our, our center of gravity, which is the way we place our feet, and then how it's going to be behaving as we want to take a step forward. Our weight has to shift onto one leg so that the other leg is free to go up, right? So in a very simplified way, this would happen. And what you can see here, the yellow line represents someone with Parkinson, which means that that shifting of weight is more compromised. It's less, it's more insecure, related to several things, but this is the difference that is happening if you don't have Parkinson. So I think it's also good to understand that there's a lot of study to this. So these tips that we're talking about are usually based on the research that we learn. The relevance of this asymmetry is that it impacts your posture and it impacts your gait in the long run in terms of Parkinson. So everything you do in terms of exercise is to be able to exercise, and the activities and all the interventions that you may do is to be able to keep this balance between the less affected side and most affected side. And this is just an example of if we don't think about it, we will always be using that less affected side for everything. So even if you're in the standing position, the tendency will be for you to always be on that leg more. So that means the brain receives more information about that leg. And so that also makes it, all the decisions are based on the existence of that leg. And it's almost like you have a rubber that's erasing the other side. Now, this seems like a very dark picture, but the truth is, just by stimulating the other side, you can reduce this asymmetry. And that's why I think it's one of the key elements or strategies for balance, which if you want to keep your balance better, one way to really focus is how can I reduce this asymmetry throughout everything that I do during the day. And then obviously the impact it has on walking is where we are most concerned, because it could bring situations like this. We have one leg that is really, really dominating and doesn't even allow the other one to play past it. And this is where the key comes in. Just feeling confident that the body is being able to shift from one leg to the other, and one leg is not prepared to be together because it basically is not existing or is not confident of using that affected side, then the brain won't take that decision to throw the weight onto that. So this has to be like a ping pong, and we have to be able to shift our weight from one foot to the other with confidence. Okay, so and when we talk about this asymmetry, what are ways that people are using to be able to reduce it in therapy? And as I was saying, therapy or exercise, what do you do in daily life? Usually the best evidence that we have is the use of the treadmill, for example. And people do training on treadmills all the time. I'm sure if you are working with someone with Parkinson, this would be that has that specializes in Parkinson or not. But these are things that you can even access in the gym. And that's why I'm bringing this as an example, because even if you are doing this in the gym, I would just like to raise awareness on thinking about that affected side is very important. Making sure that you are using whatever sorts of cues. You can see here, this is cues on either lines on the floor, or you're thinking about bringing the knee high, or you're kicking the ball forward. There are ways for you to be able to do this type of training that helps you in many ways in terms of gait overall, but to reduce this asymmetry, so you make sure that each step is really with good quality. Again, reinforcing that there's lots of research that studies the use of one thing or the other. So they compared treadmill training with adding in visual or auditory cues. So you can see that this was just for an example, so you can see the impact that it has, the benefit that it has when you add in these cues, and the evidence is there to help us make whatever we do better. And these things are always coming out. So this was a research study that it has been over and over, I would say, supported by new evidence. And the impact here was also to reinforce it on freezing of gait, where we are struggling to have effective treatments. And now something that I also know people usually do a lot, which is the Nordic walking. And so if this is something that I do on a daily basis, how can I use this to help me think about how can I reinforce my less affected side? In this case, I just want to highlight that there's lots of strategies that people use that you will hear about, like internal cues or cognitive cues, where in this case, the gentleman identifies that the left leg is really dragging behind. So we have to think about a key word. So either he's thinking about heel first on his left foot or knee forward. The struggle with these strategies is that the brain is very smart. He gets used to it and then it stops working. And it requires a lot of attention to be able to use them. This is a limitation. So they work really well, especially if you're walking with someone and someone's saying big steps, big steps. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard a lot about this type of training. But the truth is, it's very exhausting because you have to be constantly cognitively engaged in being able to apply them. What we do want is that by using this type of training, that things will become more automatic. So you won't have to think so much about it. And there's so many strategies that we could mention: counting your steps, taking a step forward, turning back. So, and that would take a whole week for us to be able to explain. So I'm summarizing that. Just know that there are lots of strategies that may help you keep good quality movement while you are training. In this case, imagine it's the arm that was influencing the movement. So maybe we can use the sticks in different ways. And then another example would be, okay, so, I love to do machines at the gym, and how can I do this? Well, I can highlight that just by thinking about it. This is nothing special. What I'm telling the person, even in a machine, which in this case, it's really to work on strength of the legs. It's an interesting machine for strength training. But while you do it, if you actually focus your attention on the most affected side, you will see the difference. You are working on both legs, but you will feel the difference. So usually we'd play around with saying, okay, I want you to think about nothing as you bring it up once. Now I want you to think about your most affected side as it comes up, and then nothing again. So you actually training the brain to either think about it. So you're cueing cognitively, you're thinking about that, and then you want to come to a point where you don't think about it. So even in something like this, it's possible to apply this type of treatment. Now, I know some people say, but sometimes what if I don't have an affected side? Let me highlight that for the diagnosis of Parkinson, asymmetry has to be present. You might not feel it, which usually happens with people that are most like right-sided, because throughout your life, you've always used your right side, so the asymmetry is less. And so just being mindful that I know that sometimes you might not know exactly which one it is, but it's usually what takes you to the doctor. Like one arm that's not moving or one leg that's dragging more. And so in our balance folder, this would be the key message that I would put in, which is engage and maintain ongoing training. Training can be activities, whatever you do, that you are trying to focus specifically on your most affected side. And this would be my tip for people to keep their balance the best they can. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it looks good. Yeah, I'm just seeing it there. You got to make a habit out of it for sure.
Okay, so if we go into our next folder, which was cognition, this is always a tough one because cognition is always so complex. We can't really think about one movement that is not cognitive, right? Everything comes from decisions that happen in the brain. And so the relevance of this is just knowing how sometimes we might not identify things that are that have to do a cognitive load, and in this case on balance. So the influence of doing such an activity, as you can see, it's drinking suddenly becomes a dual task. And this might sound strange, but it's basically because balance is affected in Parkinson. It becomes, and it's less automatic, it becomes a task. So being able to keep upright is something that is a task number one, as you would call it. And because it's not automatic, whatever you do in the standing position will be dual tasking. And that's why people get the fatigue is particularly, I would say, strong in Parkinson, because you are working much more than anyone else, right? Because most of these things, when we are walking and we're talking with someone, in this case, it's a typical example of people walking with their phones. This is all people with Parkinson that I'm showing you. And that will slow us down. Anyone would slow down. Anyone will stop as well. It's just to say that this is more marked in Parkinson disease. And if the automatic pilot is working better, you are able to be more resilient to this type of interference. But this is something that will happen as we age normally as well. It's just more affected in Parkinson's disease, and being aware of this. So we think about, okay, so what would be a strategy for this, right? One is highlighting this to you, being able to really reinforce that keeping an upright posture and being able to walk and do other things becomes two tasks in Parkinson, which is not typical with someone without Parkinson, right? So it's just, and that's why people are talking a lot about the dual task training and cognition and how it has to be in your training. It's basically to train what you do in daily life, right? This is someone whose posture is actually going in the opposite direction of what we would expect. But so it manifests in different ways. And that's important to recognize yourself. I think the best instrument to even help other professionals help you better is these small videos. You know, it's like, could you get me a video of what you do in daily activities? Because in the clinic, it's very hard for us to see these challenges, right? So walking with a glass in your hand, that's considered a dual task. That's the interference of cognition is there because it's two tasks at once. Okay. And just, I would say, highlighting that this is becoming an issue of high concern, because this combination of especially the phone. I think I found this paper actually particularly interesting. It just came out. And as we have all our lives at this moment summarized to our phones, the tendency for us to use it is bigger and bigger. And being aware that even this studied in different neurologic situations and in the elderly, that people with Parkinson were the group that were identified the highest to fall. And this was in turning, which we know is already challenging by itself, but just showing you that there's concerns that even the scientific world is really dedicated to understanding. So what are we doing about it? We are creating exercises at this moment that engage your brain. So you should be, at this moment, I would imagine, even who does boxing or dancing, everything has a cognitive component to it. And this is just an example that I bring you, which is a movement that we usually do about opening up our arms. This is so typical example that everyone does in their gyms if they're working with someone with Parkinson. And so can we make something that is simple, more cognitively challenging, and incorporate all these ingredients that I put here in the side for you, which is it has to be aerobic, it has to work on your amplitude, it has to increase the speed as once you guarantee the amplitude. That's why she has the balls, so that I can guarantee that I can increase the speed without losing the amplitude. It has to challenge your balance. As soon as I start doing more exercises, I'm challenging your balance. And obviously you can see she's doing sequences where she's engaging in cognitively, in memorizing the sequence that I had gave her as a challenge. And then the question is, can we create these activities in the gym that are challenging but also fun at the same time? And there's a moment where she gets really angry because she got it wrong. But so there's a limit to what we can do. We are as you can see,
She's pretty competitive.
but she laughs after, so it's okay. So it's important for us to see the limits of these type of activities They have to continue to be fun. If you're thinking about more specific things, sometimes people think a lot about the boxing, which is very popular because it has all those sequence of 1, 1, 2, and 2, 3, 4, and it's very cognitive, and it's also moving. It's very engaging. So it's a powerful example. But I did want to say that if you're thinking specifically about balance and posture, you might want to consider working on things that have to do with reactions when we are placed in a situation of risk. Even though this seems very controlled, they are taking decisions. The music, it might seem like it's dancing. It's not dancing. These are the tips that when the doctor pushes you in shoulders backwards, what you will be doing is trying to react. So it has to do with what naturally happens if I'm in a fall situation. I'll have to quickly react with a step as the last resource of trying to catch myself.
While you're keeping track of the sequences too.
In this case, it's just to translate what is the relevance of this. If you're doing this in the gym, it has to do with quick reactions on a daily basis if you are placed in a situation of risk, or you have to take a quick step to be able to keep your balance. So things like this exist, I'm sure, everyone here. And it has to be, at this moment, is thinking about how can we put this together. The challenges that health professionals are facing is who do we apply it to, how do we apply it, how do we increase, how do we keep the engagement, how do we make this fun, how does this continue to feel like exercise. So it doesn't matter what we do, but it is possible to do with different people. So it's we can just add in simple distractions, and that will keep us cognitively engaged. The better it is close to something that the person is dealing with, in this case, someone that is that has a risk of falling every time he stands up from his couch at home. So we just bring in a cognitive challenge to distract him so that it will mimic more or less what happens in his house, right? So this is what we would call something that is function-based. We have a specific situation that we want to improve, which is him being able to be more resilient to distractions when he's standing up in his house. Somebody knocks on the door and he tries to get up quickly, and then he has a risk of falling. And then you might be doing things now at this moment in the gym that you don't really understand. Why am I doing this? And so they might be strange because they have nothing to do with nothing. No one's going to be walking around in the streets, running away from balls or anything. But the truth is, the creativity that's happening in the gyms is just to, again, make it fun, make it engaging, and at the same time, make it aerobic with those exercise components that are so important. So even though she seems like she's not doing it, she has a mission for each one of the balls. So the balance, the aerobic, everything is in there. And the only goal is to be able to help the person be resilient to cognitive interference.
It's kind of an overtraining effect where you work on something at a higher level, and then when you bring it back into your normal environment, you've overlearned it, you've overextended the amount of effort you need just so that when it comes back, it feels a little more normal. This kind of gets back to calibration too.
Yeah, and so what I usually tell people is like, okay, so this is very challenging. That's true. If you are, so having a little bit of patience for us to be able to train you there, because everything else in daily life will be easier after that. Yeah. And yes, and there's lots of research that's supporting this type of practice. In the unlikely, because I believe that nowadays everyone is getting subjected a little bit to this type of training, but if you do not have access for some reason, or I wanted to highlight this research paper which actually compares something interesting, which is comparing individual with group. And the importance of this is because we know that one of the ways for us to improve cognition is by social interaction. It's a very strong element. And this, it's not about the Tai Chi in this moment. It's just comparing an activity that actually can't be really it's very objective. It's a protocol. You apply it the same way. So the same protocol was applied in the home and the same protocol was applied in the group setting. It's not like it's an intervention where people will be talking through it, because you're usually very in a more meditative state when you're doing Tai Chi. And so it's an interesting comparison of an intervention that the intervention does not influence the results, which means that it was the group that showed a better effect on cognition. Now, if they are applying the same thing, why did the group get more cognitive benefits than the individual? And so this is where the evidence starts supporting that social interaction is very important for us. So if nothing else, I hope that you are able to interact, if not in person, at least online. There's also some interactions that are happening.
Just a couple quick comments in chat, just real quick. Freezing a gait, not to be confused with brain fog, and that's a really good one, because brain fog is, we have bradykinesia, slow movement, and that's bradyphrenia, which means slow movement of the brain or the thinking. So yeah, freezing a gait is very specific. That what would you say? If people feel as if they're stuck, do you want to have? You have a better one?
No, and there's lots of factors that can be underlining, obviously, the freezing of gait, and brain fog has been identified more with the attention, with the cognitive component of it, and it's more complex.
And then someone also said, read a case study recently that said concurrent use of DBS and levodopa could cause freezing. If it's really a case study, I mean, is that an N of 1 or a really small group? That might be kind of an outlier effect, don't you think? It's possible. Usually freezing resolves when you add medication. It's we call an off-period freezing.
I would highlight that obviously when we talk about deep brain stimulation, we're talking about an intervention that can have so many different results, right? So I wouldn't be surprised that would happen, because, and I wouldn't even call it a complication. It depends on where we're stimulating, and it depends if it was already a freezing that already existed, if it's resistant or not to levodopa. So if it's on freezing, it won't. There's always magnificent changes when the person does DBS, because it kind of like depends what we are stimulating, what the settings are, and then the doctor changes something, and then it gives you another effect.
Like a Zoom update. I did try to find that DOI. It is possible
to happen.
It went to something I couldn't find it, so I'll look that up, and maybe later on we can look at that again. But it wouldn't go to an article I could find, unfortunately. I think there's a number.
And I will come back to freezing a little bit more. But so I want to highlight in this folder of cognition, if I had to say one thing in 5 seconds, this would be. So it'd be to try to engage in social exercise activities. It doesn't have to be exercise activities, whatever you do, that relate to standing and walking. So the more specific, obviously, it is to the standing and the walking means balance. And so it's me doing this in line position might not give me the benefits that I want if I want to improve my walking. And that make you sweat. So the key word is sweat, means we know that the best evidence at this moment is aerobic exercise to improve cognition, to improve movement, to improve a lot of things. But if you are cognitively engaged, you will have better outcomes. And this is not only opinion based or experience based, but is also research based. So hopefully that one goes into the cognition. It couldn't be simplified to one. Only simple, it has to be complex. Okay.
Like walking and talking. Yeah.
Okay, so we go into our folder of complications, which is always a scary word, because there's things that we control and things we don't control. And so this was just an overall image to show you that in blue is the things that we know that in Parkinson are predictable. So there are walking changes that the research has allowed us to be able to define and characterize, so we know what to expect. And that's why there's so much focus on the balance. We really want to help you prevent these situations of falling. And so these are things that are becoming slower, that we consider normal changes, subject to the diagnosis itself, right? And then, unfortunately, because there's things that we don't control in life, there could be complications, and that is where you have these situations like freezing of gait and the fascination. We'll jump into it, and also changes in posture, which have specific names. Horrible to say. But I did want to highlight so that if you think those strategies that we're talking about, if they can be applied, yes, they are applied the same, because unfortunately in these severe situations and complications of posture, we tend to use everything that we usually use for changes in posture. But I did not want to not show you, because if you are dealing with a situation like that, it would require more than just a talk on, do exercise, keep active. You will probably need a more dedicated approach in terms of intervention to be able to help you deal with these situations. Okay, so this is where the health team comes in and they help you deal better with these complications. When we think of gait and those changes, and we're highlighting here these situations of where the feet, this is just an example of what we expect of changes, is the slowness of movement becomes more impactful as you have more years with the disease, and that's also a challenge, I would say, reduced by the workouts you do and the exercise, and that's why everyone keeps telling you exercise, because the more active you are, the less these things happen. And obviously, on this side, what we see is the freezing of gait. So the feeling that my feet are stuck to the floor is a very complex situation that has many pharmacological and non-pharmacological interventions. If it's freezing and off, for example, if this is happening when you're turning maybe in the morning and your doctor changes the medication, and then you stop having these issues. So it's very important to have this studied by the clinician so that he can guide you in the best interventions. It would be impossible to summarize this in one hour, but I'm trying to just give you key messages regarding the freezing of gait. Is understanding that you can hear talks and read about it, different cueing strategies that people apply and treatments, but I would always guide people to trying to understand, are we talking about turning when I'm in the bathroom and I want to turn around and my feet get stuck to the floor? So what can I do in that situation? And brainstorm with your health team about how you can do it. So you could have a series of cueing strategies for that. This one is the most common. People will tend to because remember the feet together is if we are able to keep them apart, then this tends to happen less, right? So just knowing that, and then walking forward, and then if I'm distracted by something, then my feet might hesitate more. If I'm going through places, which is a specific situation, I'm going through doorways or quick elevator, no, it's not elevator, escalator.
How about when we were on the plane this day and you're navigating through all that nonsense?
Yeah, so it's a narrow spaces that it's like your brain is interpreting that the space is even smaller, so you're focusing on the space and are unable to calibrate your body in space. And so that's a specific issue where we might have strategies like focusing on something or counting the steps or focusing on a target in forward. So there are tips and tricks for each one of these situations, and your health professional should be able to help guide you in them. The best one that I think is most useful is being able to, for that person, what is happening in extreme situations of freezing. So here is Sarah that was diagnosed with Parkinson very young on, and is dealing with freezing for many years now. And we are trying to figure out what happens in the moment, in the extreme moment. And we figured out that her neck actually goes in at the moment that she's about to fall or freeze. And so it's like, you know what, maybe the strategy for you will be, as you feel this is coming on, lift up your chest, or so you bring it up. So now we've recognized, we've identified exactly what happens in the moment. And then I want to train with her if she can push her neck up. And it works. It actually works, and we train it. So we're training a strategy specific to her. Then we found out that if she almost jumps in the moment of the freezing, it works. Which I'm laughing because that seems like an extreme strategy. That's why we're laughing, because it's not something that I would tell someone. You know what? When your feet are getting glued to the floor, why don't you jump? But for her, it works. So it's just making sure you work with someone that can help you reflect and brainstorm on this. This was us identifying the asymmetry between the both legs, and so we need to stimulate the most affected side. So the way we're going to do this is to be able to reinforce the weight on that leg. Wake it up. Let's wake it up. And this is something that people can do very easily at home. You hold on to a chair, and you're just on the most affected side, and you're just giving information to the leg. And then you walk a bit, and you see the difference of that.
What I like about this is you have some of this is strengthening, some of this is practice, and then some of it's like a trick. I remember talking with this woman at a conference not too long after she came to work with you when we were in California. And she actually like, hey, I need you to stand on this side. We're walking to get coffee, and she's like, hey, I need you on over here because it'll put my head in this position. So it's like a tip plus practice plus strengthening, right?
And then we'd apply it in daily life activities like going out to the coffee shop and making sure. So if the person on your left, she would rotate her head to the left, and that means the chin would go in and she would freeze more often. So it's figuring these things out. I do think it's possible for us to help people with freezing of gait. It really has to be specific to be able to be useful. Okay, so inside this folder, I would, if I had to choose a non-pharmacological strategy, because I'm going to go dive into something later, which is always keep one foot in front of the other. It seems so simple, but bear with me. While we are walking, if we are able to always put our heel down first, keep one foot in front of the other, that means the freezing of gait, for example, or the shuffling will be less. Why? Because freezing of gait occurs when both feet stop together. This is, as you saw in the videos, this is what happens. The step becomes smaller and smaller, and to the point where it's stuck, right? So by reinforcing and training this, I think it's the best way to help people do better gait training and walking training to prevent these issues. And then when I say stop, that means when you are in a situation like this where you stop to talk to someone, if you have one foot slightly in front of the other, that means that when you are about to start again walking, which is a typical problem that people say, like, then I get stuck every time I want to restart my walking, your brain will know exactly which foot has to go next. So we're reducing the decision making, which is the foot that is behind is the one that's going to go next. So this is a very practical strategy that I think requires less cognition, that you don't have to think about it in the moment. It's like you train to stop always with one foot slightly in front of the other. And so in any situation around the house, around activities that you do, if you're always reinforcing this training, it will become more automatic as well.
We got another question here. One of them is going to be more straightforward than the other. So let me just read it out loud. So is there any correlation between the frequency and amount of levodopa you take and freezing of gait problems? And this is from the same person that put that case study, which unfortunately I couldn't find when I looked it up here, guys, that said concurrent DBS plus levodopa seemed to induce it in that individual. That's not what I usually experience. It's the other way around, right?
So if we are talking about freezing in off situation, that means it's by increasing the levodopa, you will reduce the problem of freezing of gait. That is a very classical one. The doctors love freezing of in off. Yeah. Everyone hates freezing in on situation because it tends to react less. I know there are studies where they even tried high dosages of levodopa to see if it bypassed it, but as you increase the levodopa in freezing in on, it tends to make it worse. And so they made these research studies where they tried different dosages to see if it would bypass it, and I don't think it showed so much effect. So unfortunately for freezing in on, the best recommendations is to send people to physiotherapy to learn cueing strategies. The levodopa might be adjusted, but it's unfortunately it doesn't respond so well.
And just because looking at what they've said before too, I think that their working theory is that the levodopa is inducing freezing of gait, and again, I find that to be pretty unusual. And it's Parkinson's, so anything. Sometimes you have a situation with people who have dyskinesias, those excess movements, and you can get diphasic where it happens at the beginning of a dose and also at the end. But I don't think that's definitely keep working with the doctor on really being scientific about where those doses are and when that issue appears, and see if you can really track that down.
Unfortunately, the mechanisms underlying freezing are still not well studied. And so we still need to invest more in that area to understand what's happening, so that we understand how the levodopa can help or not.
There's a big grant coming up right now on that exact topic. One more here that this is an interesting one too. A friend in the UK talked about a small log with rounded spikes that he would roll on his foot and would help with his gait. Somehow the stimulation between kept some kind of connection between his brain and his feet, and it didn't last all day, but it maybe helped for an hour or two when he needed to be up and about.
Yeah. So if I'm imagining it's like those training rolls like this, and so you're giving tactile information to your feet, And by that, imagine if it could be in context specific. So in the morning, the feet are more cramped up. And so by doing, or even in the off, when the medication is working less, sometimes the feet tend to cramp up more, so become more dystonic. And so by doing these type of strategies, we alleviate that inflammation, and we reinforce more information about the foot, the whole foot, so that weight shifting can be more accurate. So I totally believe that this would be a strategy that would help.
And what I like about it, non-pharmacological, doesn't require a big expensive device that you have to buy from a manufacturer. So you might be able to experiment with that a little bit if you can get some of the parameters from your friend. It's kind of a cool idea.
And it goes in line, like I was showing you videos of the beach, because it's like the training that I like to do on the beach is because it's stimulating the foot, right? So you're giving nice information to the foot, walking around the house barefoot. It stimulates the foot so that you get more information to the brain, where you are in space.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, Not unlike your work on a trampoline, which maybe we don't get too deep in because we got other stuff, but the trampoline stuff's very interesting.
I can share. So I'm doing some training for balance, intensive balance training on trampoline on purpose, because I know it just gives that nice tactile information all the way to the body in a situation that people perceive as safe as well. So you don't have the fear of falling, and even if you slightly lose your balance, you don't enter in panic. You don't contract so much. So it's an interesting, different way for us to also to stimulate and have, I would say, novelty solutions to train balance and falls, and which obviously is the topic of today here. Okay, so that, and now identifying, I left it for the end, but it's not, but I would say it's probably the most important one, which is also goes in line with what we were talking about, the freezing in off, which is the symptoms of any symptoms regarding walking or posture will be worse when the medication is not working so well. And so this, and so you can see situations where people might have low back pain, which is actually related to the fact that the medication is not going fluidly into the body, and there's moments where you might feel it's not working so much. So any symptom will be worse in off periods, and so prioritize that. And that means prioritize the fact that if you feel that there is some new complication or some crisis, one day you wake up and you don't feel that you are able to stand up so upright, or you're not able to walk, something must be happening underlining, because it's supposed to be a slow progressing disease. So as you know, we have that studied. We know it's supposed to be slow progression. So these situations might happen, and the best thing that you can do, and that's why I put it into this folder, is to make sure that you get quickly access to a specialized doctor that will help you study what is going on, and if necessary, optimize medication, which could be either increasing or reducing, right? Because you can have both ways. And I'm not only talking about medication for Parkinson, right? You can have a urine infection, and then suddenly your walking becomes worse, and you don't know why this is happening. You might not even have symptoms of for the urine difficulties, but it is there. So, and then you might need medication like antibiotic or something, right? So it's just making you aware that these situations, if they are very typical situations that come on suddenly, are not expected, they can happen as crisis situations. So it's to the doctor we have to go. Okay?
And just to reinforce that, when she was talking about a specialized doctor, a movement disorders specialist, and I know Casey's going to know who to refer you to in your town. That's really important. You should all have, even if they're not your primary, you should have a long-term relationship with one where you can consult, because they'll be able to see this coming a little bit and be able to help you figure that out. And then any kind of infection or any other kind of crisis, that could be another factor. But even the MDS is probably going to have seen it before, because they've worked with so many people with Parkinson's. So
okay, so that is our folder for today. There's a question. Let's see.
The woman who's talking about the knobby ball said that she got it, that maybe her friend got it from his dog. I could see that. Like a dog toy.
Whatever information. It's like people might have mats or that are hard. Yeah.
I remember going to a Dick's Sporting Good and getting something I could use to massage something after, like in your arm, and it was like a ball with some knobs. You might be able to find it. Yeah. The caveat is that you probably want to run that by your doctor, because if you have any other comorbidities, if you have a peripheral neuropathy, or if you're dealing with comorbid diabetes, meaning co-occurring diabetes, something like that, But it seems, I like how non-pharmacological, non-invasive, and doesn't require an $1,800 piece of equipment from somebody. I like that.
And people come up with lots of, you're dealing with Parkinson, you're living with it on a daily basis. So most of the strategies that therapists know is things that people have taught us. Our best teachers are the person with Parkinson. The only advantage that we have is because we have many people with Parkinson, that means we have access to a lot of strategies that were used and that might eventually work with some other people. And that's why we share them in these type of talks. But I would summarize here the key messages. So in our posture, we had keep your feet comfortably apart. In our balance, engage and maintain ongoing training specific to your most affected side. For our cognition, a little bit more complex, but it says it all, to engage in social exercise activities that are related to standing and walking, so being specific, and that make you sweat, being aerobic, and also cognitively challenging for you.
Just because Casey put the link in there already, one good socially, cognitively stimulating exercise would be the Zumba class that Josefa does on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. She put the link in there. It has
Yes.
a nice way to move. It's also fun, and it's cognitively challenging. And I'm sorry to plug, but it's not very Portuguese. That's why I'm doing it, because I'm the American. I'm the American.
Wanted to. Christine reminded me to put a plug in. It's a wonderful class, and it does check off so many boxes. No experience needed either.
Yes. Oh, I mean, I've danced, and I'm like, I'm terrible at this until I start dancing with her.
Yeah. So it's mostly, I would say that if you think about improving walking, balance, you can name it.
Attention.
Usually, dance has been an intervention and a type of exercise that has shown benefits in a lot of symptoms in Parkinson. So that's why it's becoming very popular. It's not becoming, it's been popular for the last 10 years. And so if we can combine all those ingredients using dance, it's basically what we are aiming for in this program, which is combining the amplitude movements as well. So it's not only about the dancing, it has all these components. So I hope to see more of you there.
Well, and I'll say this too, as someone who doesn't come from a dance background, you could also just say purposeful exercise, big amplitude movements to music that are fun. I mean, it doesn't have to be, if dance is a scary word, then you can just say, well, I'm doing movements and I'm doing all the kind of attention cognitive work, and it's kind of fun that way too.
Okay, so that one would be for us for cognition, and then obviously keeping in mind that sometimes things might not work so well. There might be situations that are more complicated, but that if I had to think about one thing to say that's very important is to make sure that you have studied this with your doctor and that the medications are at its best, and so that you can focus in on the non-pharmacological interventions that exist with the therapists. Okay, so I think that's it.
Yeah,
hopefully these key messages make sense to everyone.
We're going to look at it. I think we got all of the, yes, we got there. If there's any other questions before we disappear, but yeah, I think that was a good one. Good coverage.
This was excellent. Any last questions, anyone? Well, thank you.
With their feet apart now?
Yes, you're
yes,
looking down.
Everybody.
I think everyone should
have. It starts there.
2 Apple Watches, one on each ankle, and every time they get too close together, get something.
Be creative, but keep them apart.
That's not a product yet. So, okay,
thank you, Josefa and John. This will be on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned for one more webinar presented by Josefa and John in November. And we really appreciate all the information, practical tips. I think everyone will take something away, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Casey. Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.